stable and unstable conditions. And before that, she has 2 engineering degrees from Iran, both in biomechanics and bioengineering. And so she's currently around 13 manuscripts published, so doing very well. In the short time she has finished her PhD and submitting federal grants as well. So let's hear from her. With a pleasure.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm really grateful to be part of this family and building since 2016. Today I'm going to talk about a little what I was doing during my PhD program, the studies that I completed, and what I'm right now trying to do. So I'm going to talk a little about stability of walking. Let me first start my presentation with a brief introduction about fall, why it is important. So annually, each year, 1 in 4 older adults over the age of 65 may experience a fall. And these falls may increase due to pathological conditions. This rate will increase to 1 in 2 over the age of 80. And there are multiple kind of reasons for this, such as decreased, for example, mechanosensory, or we can tell a neuromuscular function, as well as sensory information processing in older ages, as well as in the presence of pathological conditions that may lead to these falls. And these falls may lead to injuries such as bone fractures, mental problems, social isolation, and even death. And they are very costly for the society. So the question is, what can be done in this situation? And I will return to this question later in my presentation. There is a link between risk of fall and stability. However, these two are actually giving different information to us. Risk of fall gives us information about the likelihood of fall, and the stability will give us information how we respond to a situation that may or may not lead to a fall. The ultimate lack of stability is a fall, but we cannot limit the measure of stability to fall, no-fall condition. And the problem is that although there is a wide actually literature about measure of stability, there is no widely accepted measure of stability, and there is no gold standard. One of the most profound questions in the field of biomechanics is how we can determine the risk of fall. And in this presentation, I'm trying to just add some few information about how we can actually address this knowledge gap. The motivation for doing this research was one study that I have completed during my second year of PhD. My mentor was working with patients with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. You know that walking consumes energy, and stability also requires energy. So in pathological condition, maintaining stability may require additional energy that might be very challenge for a person that has respiratory problems. So patients with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease not only have respiratory problems and breathing issues, but also they have some muscular deficits or declines due to their disease. So my research question was that if the mechanical stability is affected in these patients, and if this is associated with increased rate of mechanical cost in these patients. So to be clear, I just wanted to see, because we know the rate of fall is higher in patients with COPD, if this is one of the reasons that increases the metabolic cost in these patients. So to define stability, I try to use a mechanical stability description that I'm going to describe here. So imagine the whole body mass is centralized in a point that we call it center of mass. In order to be stable, this center of mass should be located within the boundaries of base of support, which is a triangle or feet on the ground. So in order to have an idea about or imagine base of support, so consider that you are swaying forward and backward to the sides. How much you can sway before you take a step. This shows your base of support. Although this definition is in a standing condition, but the same definition works for the walking. So in order to be stable, we know that center of mass is also moving during walking. So we call a theoretical or virtual point that we call it extrapolated center of mass based on position and velocity of center of mass. And in order to be stable during walking, this extrapolated center of mass should be located the boundaries of base of walking, base of support, which is also moving during walking. So with this, I used one of the measures in the literature, which we call it margin of stability. Margin of stability is the distance between extrapolated center of mass and anterior posterior boundary of base of support. So that would be MOS AP, margin of stability in the anterior posterior direction, or the distance between extrapolated center of mass and mediolateral boundary of base of support. That we call it margin of stability in the mediolateral direction. Originally, margin of stability was defined to actually as a minimum distance between lateral boundary of base of support and extrapolated center of mass. But later, different scientists have been used it in anterior posterior direction and in different time points of the gait cycle, such as heel strike, mid stance, and like toe off. In this study, I used, not just in this study, in all the studies in this presentation, I used margin of stability at heel strike. The position of landing foot at heel strike determines foot placement, which is one of the most important mechanisms to control the stability. That's why this time point during gait cycle is very important to consider. So in this study, we recruited 23 healthy controls, 17 patients with COPD, and they were age matched, and we asked them to walk at 3 walking speeds. So preferred walking speed, like self-selected, 20% above and 20% below this preferred speed. And we measured margin of stability in the mediolateral and anterior posterior direction at heel strike. We also quantified metabolic power. So metabolic power shows, greater metabolic power is better when you have more energy during the task. So let me orient you to the figures of the results of this study. So the left figures are margin of stability in the mediolateral direction, and the average value and the standard deviation. The top one shows that, COPD patients are shown with gray, black lines are healthy controls. In the x-axis, you see the walking speed, and y-axis are measures of stability. So based on top figure, we see that patients with COPD walk with wider margins of stability. And based on the bottom one, we see that their variability was higher than healthy controls. For the effect of speed, we have seen that walking at faster speeds led to less margin of stability, and there is one interaction between walking speed and group, group in the margin of stability in AP direction. So the left top one is one of the most findings of this study, that we found this interaction. This means that patients with COPD from self-selected walking speed to fast walking speed, they couldn't manipulate their margin of stability in AP direction, and they actually maintained as a plateau. As we walk faster, the extrapolated center of mass will be located further outside the base of support, and that's why it will be more negative. But we don't see that negative value that we see in the healthy controls in the COPD. So the important point is that margin of stability in the AP direction is the only measure of stability that was associated with metabolic cost. So we have seen that because patients with COPD were limited in their actually resources of metabolic, they couldn't go further. I mean, they were limited by the margin of stability in the AP direction when they increased their walking speed. And there were no change for the standard deviation between groups. As we expected, metabolic power was higher in healthy controls than COPD patients. I mean, it was better in healthy individuals. And to sum up all the findings of this study, we found that medial lateral margin of stability was larger in patients with COPD. So the point is, larger margin of stability in the medial lateral direction does not mean they are more stable. It means that because there should be different actually reasoning for this. Because one of the reasons, because patients with COPD walk with a slower speed and they are more variable, maybe that's one of the reasons that led them to, they need more challenges to cope during their walking. So they need to be more safer during walking. That's why they increase their margins in the medial lateral direction, which is more important than anterior posterior because medial lateral direction requires active control, requires sensory information, requires brain to help to control the stability. However, in the anterior posterior direction, mechanics and physical condition can help to control the stability. The other thing that we found was margin of stability. The anterior posterior direction was associated with energy expenditure, and we have seen that patients with COPD were limited to manipulate their margin of stability in higher speeds. That's something to note, that stability taking part for the metabolic cost adjustment. There were some limitations for this study. That's why we wanted to answer these questions in the next slides. Our study was done in the treadmill condition. So the first question is overground walking, is that similar during overground? The next question is that walking speed was not so much different between preferred and fast and slow. So 20% was not enough to increase and decrease the speed. We wanted to walk very fast or very slow, so that's why we increased this rate of change to 40%. And the other thing was that we quantified the stability during a steady state walking. However, we know that most of the falls happens during challenging conditions, which are not a steady state. So that's why we wanted to fill the gap. If the walking mode, walking overground versus walking on treadmill, would affect the stability. And the other thing, how, for example, the speed of walking and magnitude of perturbations will affect the stability in challenging conditions. So the first set of research questions were, as I said, if walking on treadmill is similar to overground. You know that in the biomechanics lab, most of the tests are being done on treadmill because we don't have enough space. So that's why it's very important to find out if there is any changes in overground versus treadmill and how we can interpret our results. The other question is that what would be the effect of walking speed on the steady state condition on treadmill versus overground? So our first hypothesis was if walking overground is similar with walking on treadmill in case of stability, like margin of stability in the anterior, posterior, and medial lateral direction, and their margin of stability variations. The next hypothesis was about the speed. There is one question that everyone asks: if walking is slower, is more stable? We don't know that answer for sure, and we try to find out about mechanical stability. If walking slower has larger margins and if it is more variable or not. That was our second hypothesis. So we asked our participants to walk on the treadmill at 3 different speeds. Preferred walking speed 40% above and 40% below that preferred speed, and we asked them to walk over ground at the matched walking speed. So let me orient you to the walking path. We asked them to walk on the overground. We asked them to walk over 2 cones for at least 5 times, going backward and forward. And we quantified the center of mass velocity during this walking in order to find out if this center of mass velocity in each condition is close to their treadmill walking. And that was based on a MATLAB code, online MATLAB code, that we quantified their velocity between 2 mark points and give them feedback to increase your speed or decrease your speed in order to be close to what we have done during overground. So in the analysis, we only use those heel strikes that their speed were within the 5% of treadmill speed for each condition. So we used matched speed for each condition. So now let me orient you to the figures again. The left down figure is margin of stability AP mean values. The x-axis again is speeds. Treadmill was shown with black line and overground with gray line. As you see, as we expected, margin of stability in the anterior posterior direction is not different between treadmill and overground. But the important and exciting thing is that we found this difference in the mediolateral direction. So we found that participants who were healthy controls were walking with wider margin of stability on the treadmill. So that's another good point that we found. In the mediolateral direction, we need sensory information processing for our stability, for the control of stability. So we see that on treadmill, they walk with wider margins. Why this happens? Because on treadmill, the sensory information are manipulating. You don't see the optic flow, which is normal. On treadmill, the proprioception is changing. So that should be one of the reasons that participants try to be safer again and have larger margins when they were walking on treadmill. For the effect of speed, we have seen that walking faster led to decrease in margin of stability in both mediolateral and anterior posterior direction. For the margin of stability variability, we have seen that it is kind of constant on treadmill. However, we see this increasing overground when we walk overground. And this increase can be due to different factors, such as changes on the gait speed, which we cannot change on treadmill because treadmill belt is gonna fix the speed, and some other physical constraints on treadmill. So the take-home messages from this study was we cannot actually compare the margin of stability overground with the treadmill results. So we should, when we are going to interpret the results in the literature, we should consider these changes in the walking modes. As walking on treadmill is like more conservative, and it is more variable when we are walking overground. So the next questions that came to my mind was, we have done all these during a steady state condition, but we know that never falls happen during a steady state. So what will happen if we challenge their walking? So for challenge walking, we use perturbations. Perturbation defined as manipulation of sensory information or environmental physical situation that disturbs walking. So there could be different type of perturbations, such as sensory or internal or external environmental changes, such as obstacles during walking or inducing sleep trips or translation of platform when the person is walking. And it is important to look at the detailed behavior of body motion after one perturbation happens. So after the onset of perturbation, the person may lose their balance completely or recover. So it's important to find out how they react to the perturbation. So in this study, we try to find out the effect of perturbation magnitude versus walking and walking speed on body responses to the perturbation. And we applied perturbations like translation of platform during walking at heel contact. So it was triggered at heel contact. So we had baseline conditions like walking without any perturbations for unperturbed gait cycles. We had we removed the first perturbation exposure because it is usually, always different the first time that we are exposed to a perturbation than the next times. And we calculated trunk velocity, 3 linear and 3 angular trunk velocity, so overall in 6 dimensions. We recruited 18 participants, young, healthy adults, and we checked their BMI to be within the actually healthy normal range, not lower or higher. So we asked our participants for each trial to walk 45 seconds. The first 5 seconds were time to getting used to the walking steady state, to be stationary. Next, they were walking without perturbation, and the actual perturbation happened at 25 to 35 seconds of walking, and there were time for recovery back from the perturbation. There were 3 walking speeds, 40% below, 40% above preferred walking speed and preferred walking speed, and there were 3 magnitudes of perturbation. So we actually had medial perturbation, which was defined as translation of treadmill to the right side at left heel contact, and we had lateral perturbation, which was translation to the right at right heel contact. So for defining the body responses to the perturbation, we used deviation from unperturbed limit cycle. We calculated that with the equation. For each percentage of stride, we calculated the difference of perturbed walking from unperturbed over the variance of unperturbed. And with this, we actually created a graph like this. You see the distance from attractor, or the distance from unperturbed limit cycle. We're close to 0 at the beginning. When the perturbation starts, it rises quickly, and it actually reaches to the point that we call it maximum distance from attractor, and then it returns back with a rate to the steady state or relaxation time, relaxation condition again, which we call it rate of recovery. So the values that we used for this description of body responses were B, the maximum distance from attractor, tau, how much time would it take to get to that maximum distance, beta, which is the rate of recovery, and DHC, which is distance from attractor at first recovery heel contact. So we considered B and tau for the initial phase of responses to the perturbation, and then beta and DHC for the recovery phase. So just briefly, I'm going to talk about the results. This is about the effect of walking speed. By increasing walking speed, we see that the body deviation from attractor decreased, which is very important and very exciting again. When we walk faster, our body momentum increased. So our body will be more resistant to the changes. So the first and initial phase will be improved. We are not deviated as easy as we were walking slowly. But the recovery decreased. And for the effect of magnitude of perturbation, actually we expected all this, that by increasing the magnitude of perturbation, body momentum again increases in the medial lateral direction for sure, and then body distances from attractor will be increased, but recovery again decreased in larger magnitude. So it is easier to recover during smaller magnitude of perturbation. So to actually summarize what we have found here, walking faster enhanced the initial responses to the perturbation. However, the magnitude of perturbation, when we increase the magnitude of perturbation, it has detrimental effect on both initial and recovery responses to the perturbation. So to summarize the findings of all the studies that I described, I can tell that presence of pathology could affect walking stability, and it was related to the metabolic cost. Walking on treadmill was more conservative, and walking speed and magnitude of perturbation could affect compensatory responses. So now to return back to the question that I asked at the beginning, what can be done for individuals who are at risk of fall? These were all the studies that give us basic knowledge about stability, but how we can use this? Currently, I'm trying to use all the knowledge that I have gained from the basic research that I have done during my PhD to make it more applied, to actually use the application for clinical populations and older adults. So I'm trying to find out about protocols that we should design for balance trainings. So one of the things that are very important is to use perturbations for train balance, for training actually stability. So how we should use these perturbations? There are so many published articles that use different kinds of perturbations, but I personally believe if we can find out the relationship between brain and body responses after perturbation, that will help us to find out how we should train a specific underlying mechanism that controls the stability from brain, and then with this we design our protocols. There are so many still kind of research that can be done in this area. One of the things is to quantify fall risk in fallers and non-fallers with challenging gait protocols. There are so many, again, publications, but still some space for improving and completing this literature. As I considered, mechanisms underlying perturbation responses are very important to identify. The neural, brain responses, the muscular function. There are ongoing research studies about muscle function, but brain imaging is really hard in perturbed conditions, so it is need for improving this science. Training applications, for sure, we are interested in finding out about the protocols and trainings for improving balance. The next thing is that as we found out the stability is related to the energy expenditure, we want to find out how improving stability can actually have a trade-off with energy expenditure, and how we can decrease the energy expenditure with improving stability. And lastly, near fall detection, that using prediction techniques, using machine learning or whatever that we can find out from a behavior about movement behavior, that some person is prone to fall. How we can detect this? For example, my mother is very unstable. I should find it out earlier than later that the fall happens, and actually ask them to go to the doctor and do some programs for increase their stability. So with this, I would like to thank all the collaborators in my studies. During my PhD and research associate program, I was funded by NASA, NIH, from my mentors, and also internal grants from University of Nebraska. Thank you so much, audience, for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, questions?
In that current study, the perturbation between the medial to lateral, did it happen only one leg or both?
No, we had actually, in each trial, we had, for example, perturbation to the right side at right hemistride, or in the next trial, it was to the right side at left hemistride. And again, we had it for the left side. So perturbation were to the left side at right hemistride and left side to the left hemistride.
So that the perturbation wasn't randomized.
Randomized, yeah. Medial, lateral perturbations for both feet and both directions.
So in that case, can you anticipate any sort of learning effect where, I don't know.
So we used different, basically we should see some kind of mirroring when we are doing medial perturbation. It should be actually similar in right foot and left foot. But we added left foot in order to actually address this learning effect, because if always we are going to trigger the perturbation at the right foot, we can do medial and lateral both with right foot, because when we are doing toward right side at right, it will be lateral, toward left side at right will be medial. But we added that left foot in order to address this learning effect. But for sure we have learning. We cannot avoid it. Yes, please.
So thank you for the presentation. Fall is a great, important risk factor for the elderly people. My question is about: do you think it's important to predict the fall, for example, from the movement pattern of an old person? Then you can say, okay, you are about to fall, have some rest, or
Exactly,
something like
yeah.
that.
These are some of the ongoing research that how we can predict fall. So that was the last item that I mentioned, that from the body movement patterns that we can we can have a good, for example, source of movement from fallers and then non-fallers, and then with the algorithm that we have for fallers, just predict if the person is closer to the fallers or not. So that's why we can identify if that person requires additional care and should be notified earlier than later. Yeah. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. Thank you.
Yes, please.
There was another.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yes, please.
Sorry. I was wondering if you found any the neural mechanisms of balance and all, just through researching earlier studies.
I don't.
The neural mechanisms
Sure.
behind balance. Did you find anything from that?
Actually, there are so many literature about this, that vestibular function, vision. Our balance will be controlled by sensory functions, vestibular, vision, and actually somatosensory function. All this together works together in order to keep our balance during walking. But as I said, the neural mechanism is which part of brain exactly will be activated after a perturbation is happening, and what's the difference between, for example, fallers and non-fallers, what's the difference between healthy individuals and older adults, and we can train those who are conscious to actually be more toward the health. Yeah, please.
I had one question, kind of a continuation of his question was, if you compare the effects for older adults relative to younger and COPD relative to younger, are they similar? Would you say that COPD is just like older people, more frail and...
No, for sure. I think, as I mentioned, the rate of fall is twice in patients with COPD other than healthy individuals. So for sure there is a difference between different categories. The presence of pathological condition and different kind of comorbidities will affect the walking stability, and we should consider that in when you're going to make a model.
But I mean more specifically in terms of, is it mediolateral, anterior, posterior,
No, about
like that?
so we have seen difference between COPD and healthy for the mediolateral direction, and for the anterior posterior, as if you remember, also we have seen differences that was related to metabolic cause in COPD patients, but I'm not sure in other patient populations how that would affect. But it requires giant body of literature to find out every specific thing that might happen during fall.
One more question out of curiosity, sorry. So children also fall, like, young children try to walk. Is there a similar pattern between the old people who fall and with children? Is it a similar pattern?
Oh, that's a very exciting question.
Just
Actually, motor development is actually being developed in children. So we can tell that older adults may fall because of they have some muscular deficits or some sensory information processing. That can be kind of similar to young, very young children who are trying to improve their muscle function. So we know that they are not very powerful, and also maybe they are learning to use different sensory information processing. So we can actually make some similarities, but they are actually having different underlying reasons for their deficits and their stability.